two big areas in that are like the functions or the reasons why people communicate. Like I said, to express themselves, to ask for things, to request things. And then also you have to think about the context or the different linguistic forms they can do to get at that. You know, they can use nonverbal communication, they can use questions, they can use requests. So there's all these different aspects that are all playing together when we're asking children to be language competent. So when you think about how they develop, and these are just very big general guidelines. So let's think about their language skills first. So you start seeing early communication right from being a newborn, where they respond to loud noises. We get them to start picking objects. You know, we play peekaboo with them so we can get them to respond and take turns. That's when we start moving into routines. Facial expressions, eye gaze, being able to track things in their environment. That's all part of language development. Then 12 to 14 months, we start seeing developments of first words. As we move through the preschool years, they start putting more words together and learning a wider variety of vocabulary, start to form phrases and sentences. Then as we starting to move into the preschool years further, they start to expand their vocabulary and the length of their sentences. As we see them then, you know, moving through the school years, language actually continues to develop up to young adulthood. We see them picking up more language skills, you know, gaining more knowledge, and that continues to develop. So language development isn't static, it continues on throughout our lives. So if you think the same with speech, it doesn't like me. There we go. Same thing, you're starting to see sounds develop in parallel with language. So they're actually, you know, when they're younger, we interpret their crying, their burps, their coughs, their sneezes as communication because they're starting to vocalize. We start to do the play with them where they start to, you know, draw out vowels, ooh, ah, you know, and you're doing those with the babies. Non-speech sounds, getting them to spit, you know, getting them to click their tongue. Moving towards, you know, moving into 12 months, they actually start to babble and start to repeat sounds. Ba, 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 da, da, da. Oh my gosh, he said dad. You know, so as you start to attribute meaning to some of those, then you actually start to see first words starting to develop. You start seeing the symbol combinations. They may have a more limited sound repertoire as they're younger because they're, you know, they're articulators, their tongue, their teeth, their lips. They can't manipulate them well when they're younger. That's something that continues to develop as they get older. So we start to see more rapid speech development where they can start using greater sound varieties as they get into like 18 months, 3 years. Then we start moving into those difficult sounds that you start to see in the preschool years, the L's, the R's, the ch's, the sh's, and moving into actually 4 and 5 years where they're still trying to say some of those more difficult sounds. So you can kind of see speech and language develop in a parallel fashion, but there are very distinct characteristics between the two. So as I said, there's lots of sites you can go to. These are some really good ones, the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, that give typical speech and language milestones. So you can kind of see where you're supposed to expect kids could be at, and that's when you can start to figure out if you should be more concerned when they're not at certain targets. So these are just general guidelines. Don't think that, you know, you have to specifically have every aspect of it. So those are just some good, I've got some additional ones at the end. So I just kind of wanted you to know that there's more detailed information you can access with that. So when we talk about we're seeing all this development in kids and we're in these early learning environments, how can we best start to support their speech and language development? So we're going to go kind of two big areas. Just general speech and language models and actually working on fostering social interaction to develop some of these language areas. So basically, this is that we want to provide a good model of behavior when we're in our classrooms. And some good ways to do that, or areas of focus, is we're actually trying to increase their language understanding, increase their verbal expression, and we want to improve their use of speech sounds. Those are our big general goals. So the big one is you've got to actually encourage listening and teach listening skills. As I'm sure you're all aware, if they're not establishing attention before you speak, so not paying attention to what you're doing. So just some general things as the classroom, some of the things, you know, teachers will use is they'll use like the Simon Say adaptation, like if you're listening, put your hands in your lap. If you're listening, you know, put your hands on your head. Or give them an action where you do the little rhyme, like 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, let's listen. Or if you're doing for an individual child, you know, you can actually cue them, okay, it's time to listen to me, we're gonna, you know, play this game, or we're going to. So there's lots of different ways you can establish attention. but it's a very key thing when you're actually wanting to work on any of these general areas or make sure they're attending to what you're saying, to actually establish attention before you start to speak. So that's a good general one. Another good thing to do, and it's very interesting when I see different teachers when you're in the classroom, you know, being an active listener. When you're trying to be an active listener and you got someone tugging on your pants, teacher, 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 teacher. So here's some general things you should try. You know, try to be at the individual's eye level and establish contact. You know, you don't want to be looming over them. You know, getting down, establishing eye contact so they know that you're attending to what they're saying. Look at them as they're speaking so they know that they have your attention. And then respond to what the individual is saying. Okay, so they know they've got your attention and you can stop tugging on your pants. You can also, a big thing in classrooms, and this is very difficult when you're in an active classroom, is try to reduce competing stimuli when you want their attention. So, you know, try to limit the other sounds, especially if the children are easily distracted. So, you know, limiting, if you're in an area working on something, limit the number of toys that can distract them while you're doing that. You know, or put them out of their reach. So if you're wanting to work on one specific thing. You know, be in an environment where there's less people speaking around them so they can attend. You know, if there's other ongoing activities, of course they're going to be watching that. So trying to limit those near the child if you're trying to focus them. Another challenging thing is when you're doing this as well, is you want to make sure you're communicating at their level of understanding. A lot of people will say, you know, speak at a slower rate, but you don't want to speak so unnaturally that, you know, then they start to model that. So you want to speak in a natural rate, repeat important information if you're doing it again. Just say, oh, you know, we're playing with the cars. Oh, look at those cars go. You know, repeating it over and over so they get those models. Using shorter remarks if the children either have a shorter attention span or their language level is a little lower. You know, keeping it to 2-3 word phrases versus big sentences. I have a semi-trailer and I'm going to haul sheep to the farm, you know, versus saying, oh, car, truck, sheep, go, sheep, go. You have to kind of gauge the level the child's at when you're using those models, so you're not over their head, but you don't want to be too low either. It's kind of a balancing act. And pointing and gesturing helps too. Any comments or questions about this first one? So those are some, and like I say, picking up these ideas, and if you have some questions afterwards about how to apply these, we can talk about that too. Now, any of you who've been going through the Learning Language and Loving It program in Hannon and Manitoba, you've probably already done Observe, Wait, Listen, so this is my homage to Hannon. So you're talking about giving the child actual time to respond when you're posing questions or information to them. So one good way to do that is observe, wait, listen. So you observe to see what the child is interested in. So you stand back and kind of see what they're doing. You wait and you give them a chance to initiate. Often we'll try to jump in and give words or give into because they're not saying anything. Stand back, count to 10 in your head, and actually give them a chance to initiate. Listen to what they're trying to tell you, and then when they do, respond to what they say. So if you know you're playing something and they're playing with trucks and you're like, I gotta jump in there and do something so they'll talk. Sit back, give them a minute. Then if you need to provide a model, you can provide a model. Wait and see if they respond. And you kind of do, it's kind of like a fishing expedition. You kind of lob out your words and kind of sit back and wait to see if they, you don't want to continually do things or speak for them. You want them to be initiating. Any questions about that one?
I like the count to 10. It seems like so long because as teachers, we don't like space.
Or silence, I know.
we feel like we've got to just jump in there and maybe rescue them or something. But that wait time is so important.
And as a fast talker, I tend to wait 20. It's like sit back, wait, relax. And it actually, if you try it, and I've got some good examples that I couldn't bring with me, but I had some videos. It's really obvious that when you do sit back and you give them a chance, they do tend to respond more with better quality responses than if you sit and feed them all the time or speak for them. Which leads to this one. Let the individual speak without interruptions. A lot of kids, processing takes extra time. You want to give them time to be able to formulate their thoughts in their head and get information out. So, you know, give them that time. And and let them finish speaking when they are trying to finish a statement. I know you just sit back and just like, he says, I want to play with the ball, the truck, the truck, what do you want to do? Just sit back and let them pull it out and say it. Let them finish. I do this with my dad who's had a stroke. I have to sit back and like, nope, don't finish a sentence, let him finish. And another big thing is to avoid placing pressure on the individual to speak. A lot of the time you'll see teachers go, say car, and you're like, no, because you're putting them on the spot. Or if you've ever gone to the hairdresser with your mom when you were younger, and they're like, tell the hairdresser you like this, and you're kind of like, talking, forget it. So don't make them perform in front of others. Don't put them on the spot. You want them to be initiating on their own and not being forced to do it. And another tip about that too is, if you've misunderstood something, it's okay to ask for clarification, but don't continually ask them, I still don't get it. What? I don't know what you're talking about. That gets frustrating for the child too. So you have to be sure when you're doing that. One tip I always use is I say, my ears weren't really working really well. Can you tell me that again? Okay, thanks. Can you show me what you want? So you're not putting them or letting them get frustrated because you're not understanding them. Another good thing to do when you're providing good speech and language models is actually talk about what you're doing. So then you see kids will actually start to put their thoughts into words too. So like if you're sitting, you're getting ready to go outside, it's time to put on my coat, I'm putting in my arms in the sleeves, zipping up the zipper, zip, zip, zip. And you'll see kids actually start to, when you start to model things out loud, they'll start to do it too. I think I'm going to go play with my blocks, and I'm going to build a big tower, and here's my, and then that's, you could grab out your iPods and just start videotaping. It's like, oh, he's being interactive. Some really good ideas to, get the kids to do that. Some of the things we do, like we're trying to get them to start using more verbs or using more action words or discussing objects and pictures. So here's some general suggestions, like, for object names, you can start to label the object and then give like descriptors of what it is. Oh, there's a wagon, it has rubber wheels, it has, red spokes in the middle. I'm gonna pull my wagon, pull, pull, pull. Or to build understanding of action words, it's really focusing on, let's say if you're playing with the cars with the kids, pushing, fast, slow, thinking of those action words you can use that, or even the descriptor words, so they know, so you're giving them new words to interact with common toys. And another big one in preschool is pronouns that often you see kids having a lot of difficulty with. And a good way to often do that is to take pictures in your classroom and then actually use the pronouns. I see myself, I'm jumping on the bed, and I'm jumping on the floor. Look, here's a picture of you, Susie, what are you doing? I see, and giving them those cues so they can start using those pronouns when they're describing themselves. So talking out loud about what you're doing and what the child's doing really helps build some of those language skills. Another big one is to actually expand on the remarks that they actually make. So there's different kinds of expansions you can do. You can do grammatical expansions, and semantic expansions are an example. So for example, for grammatical, is like modeling more correct use of word endings and word forms. So if the child says, baby sleep, you can say, oh, yeah, the baby is sleeping. So you're starting to teach them that they can expand those words and use those different grammatical forms. You're giving them those good models. But you can also expand the meaning of those utterances too. Baby sleep. She's very sleepy. Baby needs a nap. Let's put baby in the crib. So you're teaching them those new terms as well. So not only expanding their grammatical understanding, you're expanding their understanding of the meaning too. So those are some good ways to start expanding on what kids are giving you for information. And then a lot of preschool children have common, speech errors that you're going to see. So just some general things you can do to help develop their speech sound production without putting them on the spot and saying, that's not how you say that, fix this. So, first of all, when they make an error, repeat it correctly, but don't ask them to repeat it after you. Oh, the lid's broken. Oh, let's fix this lid. All right, let's put the lid back on and we'll fix it. Let's fix the lid. So you're giving them good models, but you're not asking them to repeat the error or repeat the correction after you, because that will just make them more conscious of what they're doing. If you're actually being followed by a speech-language pathologist and they've given you specific practice directions for a child's sound errors, you do that during practice time. Okay, during free play or your other activities in the classroom, general modeling is the best way to go. You're not putting them on the spot and you're not pointing them out to the other kids. Oh, you know, Bobby can't say his L's. You know, that's not something you want to bring to attention. So you pronounce those words clearly and correctly using a natural speaking rate so they can hear them and hopefully imitate them later. And then you want to make sure you're looking at the child so they can watch the way your lips, your teeth, your tongue are changing for the different sounds. Any questions about that one? So when you think about then the fostering the social skills, one big area you know we're starting to work on with younger children is actually giving them good conversational skills. So some of those things you can do that is teaching them conversational turn taking, you know, like, hi Bobby, how are you? I'm fine, how are you? Showing them that you can do greetings and have them respond. That's a good example of how to get them to start turn taking. Or how to initiate or maintain or close a conversation. So a lot of kids have no idea how to start a conversation, so you can give them a, you know, we're gonna say good morning to each of us in the morning, and then we're gonna ask them something about what they did today. And when you've finished your conversation, you're gonna say, okay, well that was great. Give them some closing words they can use. So they actually practice going up to somebody, starting a conversation, having a couple turns back and forth conversationally, and then actually finish the conversation. So those are some kids can pick that up naturally, some children can't. You actually have to show them how to do it. Interrupting is a big thing, so showing them how to politely interrupt. You know, it's like, Mrs. Smith's speaking right now. Can you wait until I'm done talking? Then you can, so teaching them how to do that, how to interrupt appropriately and then wait to get you to give them information or to interact with them. And changing topics is another good one. You'll have kids who are talking about one thing and all of a sudden they're talking about something else and you're like, whoa, where did that topic conversation come from? So it's talking about how to, again, close those conversations and then start a new topic. So those are all skills that just take practice, and good modeling can help with that. Another big one is to learn to help them ask and answer questions while they're interacting with other kids. So, talking about what you're doing as you're doing it, which you already mentioned, is a good way to help them do that. And one good cue I always like to use when I'm trying to get kids to start learning how to question is I use I wonder. I wonder what we should do next. And then they'll like, oh, I think we should do this and this. And it's like, okay, so starting off like that. And then you can actually get them to start asking some of those open-ended questions. Like, instead of saying, you can say, what did you do at Grandma's? I wonder if you did this or this. And they'd be like, no, I didn't do that. I did this. So kind of giving those forms so they can practice responding to questions. And a good way to do that for younger children is to actually start with choices. Like in the morning if you're doing snack at school. Do you want bread or do you want cereal? And it's like, let's say points. I said, bread, do you want bread? I think I'll have some bread today. So, giving them those choices when they're making decisions, but also then giving them the word labels for what they may not have a word label for yet. Any questions about that? I know it's a lot of information once, that's why it's all on the slides, and you can come and ask me questions as you're working through them. I just wanted to make sure I could give you some strategies that you could try out, and then you could always let me know if you have questions about them. And what I'm sure, one of the tasks when we talk about is structuring social activities so we get kids interacting with different kids in the classroom. And that's something we all endeavor to try to get kids to do. So, there's different ways to do that, setting them up in groups, where they have to be at stations to help work, and then making different kids play together versus the same kids always together all the time. And then giving positive feedback when they do demonstrate those socially appropriate behaviors. Thank you for saying please, I really appreciate that. You did such a good job. You're so polite. Or, thanks for taking turns when you were playing with the trucks. That was really nice of you to do, to give Bobby a turn. So structuring those social activities can help too.